Hey yo, I ain't gonna do too much talking. It's time to put the glasses on. Feel me? Let's get into our intellectual zone. Nah, but yo, I'm gonna just put this video up every time something poignant gets said. And it's gonna be all throughout the video.
Investigating how the outgroup threat response manifests itself when directed towards black men. If you are looking for an alien threat response using black men in this kind of research, will find an effect if there's an effect there to be found. I found that when it comes to who makes the best subjects for outgroup threat response research, black men are that perfect organism.
Yo, is that so? Hey, people out there in the comments, is he right about that? Black men are number one or something? Outside of sports and hip hop that we can all agree to? Without whispering something underneath our breath and a wink and a nod? Nah, I'm just kidding. Carry on, sir.
That line just kept coming up to me. In evolutionary psychology, there is a tool of intergroup competition that human males use, and it's called the male outgroup target hypothesis.
Male outgroup target hypothesis. Check.
It's where men of one group cooperate to restrict and cripple the ability of the men of outgroups to challenge them in gaining social rank and dominance through the acquisition of material and social resources. Men attempt to damage the men of outgroups in a multitude of ways as a sexual strategy to win intersexual competitions against them. That is what David Buss was explaining on that slide that you.
And yo, let me finish reading that quote. It says, to derogate other men in order to make them less desirable to women. Now, derogate means to belittle or disparage. You're welcome. Hey, yo, shout out to David M. Buss and the evolution of desire. This isn't being pulled out of thin air, and it stands to reason. No?
Now, if I'm playing the in-group, if I'm the in-group and want to deal with the male outgroup threat, I want to herd those males into areas where I can further obstruct their ability to mess with my tribe.
Yo, pump the brakes. Take some time to look at the screen. See that right there? That's my thesis, which I'd like to become a PhD, and then the basis for my lawsuits, and then the basis for various forms of media that speaks precisely to what the good gentleman just said. You're encouraged to read along. Case number 423-CV-01013, USDC, Southern District of Texas, Houston Division, and the neuropolitics of control, how sound, surveillance, and herd behavior form the modern mechanisms of social engineering. You see, that's that flow state that I was talking about when it comes to induced monk mode, which is what I'm going through.
This is accomplished by intergroup discrimination in a society where I have the institutional and structural power. Using institutional power, this discrimination creates what is known as a discriminatory ecology.
Discriminatory ecology. Check.
Now, these are two maps of London, one representing areas of deprivation and the other where the black population is concentrated. Now, you don't have to be a cartographer to see the black population fits neatly over those areas of deprivation. So that's right, a large percentage of England's black population exists in those deprived areas. Intergroup institutional discrimination funnels a large percentage of black people into those deprived areas.
Damn, boy, white supremacy truly is a global phenomenon.
Now, the topic of discriminatory ecologies is actually a 2-hour lecture, and we don't have time for that.
Note to self, learn about discriminatory ecology. Please, carry on, Professor Grandis.
But what I want to quickly show you is how discrimination creates these harsh ecologies and what's happened to us in them. So you want to put the pattern together through these institutions here, criminal justice, healthcare, housing, employment, and education. If you face discrimination in these areas, it chips away at you, and a higher percentage of your population will end up in those deprived areas than other populations. So blacks experience higher levels of harmful inequality in those institutions. There's all kinds of reports. Certainly here in England, we have bunches of reports on discrimination in criminal justice, education, in the labor market, healthcare, and housing. And there's plenty in America because I had to put a lot of those reports in my book to show how this was happening in the United States. So now, once high percentages of black populations are herded into these harsh ecologies via structural violence, this pattern emerges. Now, what you're looking at here, the behavior you see listed below, Group B, are the dysfunctional behaviors that deprivation evokes at a higher rate from those that live in it. If successful in forcing large percentages of a population I am not fond of into this ecology, my hands are now clean. Because the poor behavior of those that live there can be blamed on them. The connection to the use of structural violence my group has used to press them into that ecology will be missed by most. Again, there are black gender war implications here, because these ecologies powerfully impact the black gender war that cause black men and women to heavily criticize each other due to how these ecologies can shape the mating structure in ways that lead to high levels of dissatisfaction in our sexual romantic relationships.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a winner. We have a winner. Now, there'll be time to dissect this some more, but let's get to this list here. Remember, Group B, low sex ratio. Now, again, in my simulation, just reading some of these off the top of my head, these putrid physicians with a propensity to play puppet master are pulling the strings behind the scenes to create the dynamic that would suggest, algorithmically that is, especially as predictive policing mechanisms expand, that I am headed for Group B designation. That's really why I'm salty, because in a moment where we have the great reset that's taking place, low-key, we get to come together as a society and contribute to AI's path towards AGI. You got the same bloodline of the folks that capitalized and created slave catchers, Jim Crow laws, those policies that destroyed the black family, Reaganomics, the crack era, the pre-crime dynamic in society. Because, they've been watching for a minute and they have the tools. They just never announced it. But these same folks did exactly what we would expect them to do in a scenario in which they have the ability to get in front of the AI revolution, so to speak, and commodify it. And then, of course, like the gangsters that they are, they back it up with the state apparatus ready to harm you and commit violence. Matter of fact, they got you in a perpetual state of fear so that you keep running instead of embracing this moment head on. But I tell you what, since this is the loser simulation and our goal is to find out how to become winners, let's look at it from an individual accountability standpoint. Bottom line, if you've been designated into Group B, that don't mean you got to stay there or that you're going to continue to be there. Change the elements that could possibly stop you from progressing, all right? The one gripe that I have, though, as far as the categories are concerned, is when it comes to testosterone suppression. Now, listen, they gonna tell black men to not get your testosterone up there because it's gonna cause you to take more risk, right? And of course, the society's set up so that if you want to be a risk taker, they'll show you what the outcome of those risks will likely be. But white dudes don't follow those rules, and they still end up in a balanced ratio. You dig? Because they be going to get all these cell regenerating processes, HGH, testosterone therapy, you name it, just to get back into that peak position where they could be men enjoying society as a man would.
However, we can now place all kinds of negative labels on people in these ecologies based on the higher level of dysfunctional behavior that takes place in them. I can send militarized police in those areas, for example. Stress them.
On everything. I told you. I told you.
I can practice excessive use of police violence on their young males who will be behaving in a more violently criminal manner due to the stress such ecologies impose on young men.
Not necessarily, Professor. Sonic conditioning is the key. You can create a more serene environment, kind of like Andy Dufresne did in Shawshank Redemption when he played Canzonera Solaria by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart in the warden's office. All those hardened criminals just stood there looking up. You know what I'm saying? So you could do the same thing with a population of people. Frequency modulation. You know what I mean?
By restricting their status. The strategy I've used to undermine them is hidden. So I win in multiple ways with this strategy.
Just win, baby.
Because a population with higher levels of those dysfunctional behaviors has no hope of defeating my population in intergroup competition for the best education, jobs, housing, healthcare, and racial reputation of good behavior. Look at Group B. Group B can't compete with Group A, not with those behaviors. Social dominance for my crew is thus maintained and secured, and no reputational damage is placed on my crew for what I have done to them because few actually know what I have done. So, from an evolutionary perspective, this strategy is
logical. Flawlessly logical.
As we see here from David Boss, stating, sex ratio imbalances exacerbate sexual conflicts. Sexual conflict must be far more intense in the black community because 90% of African Americans live in low sex ratio conditions, while 90% of white Americans do not live in low sex ratio ecologies. So this added harmful factor means that African Americans exist in a more intensely dysfunctional sexual ecology when compared to white Americans. To a far higher degree, African Americans are more likely to live in harsh, dangerous, unpredictable, low sex ratio environments that tend to increase the prevalence of promiscuous and risky mating behavior.
Hey, but let me say this though, even though that might be the case on paper, in real life, you be finding people that's in category A that don't mind going to slum in category B. Or, you know, they want to have something spontaneous, especially women. They love spontaneity. So, yo, these things are interchangeable. A lot of the stuff is just on paper to give some groups the moral upper hand and justify how resources are handed out.
All of this connects to the research produced by Raj Chetty in his Race and Economic Opportunity study. These are the conditions that harming the males while they're boys, and then when they become young men, harming the males that way creates this type of harmful ecology. So here is a study completely separate from what Raj Chetty showed us, a 2013 study showing the relationship between sex ratios, poverty, and concurrent partnerships among men and women in the United States. So if we look at the top, we see that virtually all whites and the vast majority of Hispanics resided in counties with a balanced sex ratio. Only 7.85% of blacks in the sample resided in a county whose ratio was balanced. Meaning, over 90% of black Americans live in low sex ratio ecologies, along with all the bad behaviors and outcomes that go along with low sex ratio ecologies. Low sex ratio ecologies that are created by the harm visited on black boys and young black men in those ecologies. So here we see in the Oxford Handbook of Human Mating, published about 2-3 years ago, in the US, 90% of whites live in areas with balanced sex ratios, whereas more than 90% of African Americans live in female-biased areas, meaning there's a lot more women, a lot less men, and it creates an intense competitive environment for women, and it causes men to behave in a much more polygynous manner, meaning they will engage in more short-term sexual relationships, several women at the same time.
Thus, what I'm alleging is highly likely and probable. Come on now, look at these pictures.
Here's another example of what creates the low sex ratio ecology and is part of what would have been included in Raj Chetty's study. Tough on crime policies, in particular, have contributed to these persistent male shortages across African American communities. Ultimately, high incarceration rates of men generate female-biased sex ratios and are associated with higher rates of sexual concurrence. So this is men seeing several different women at the same time. And that creates a significant risk factor for HIV infection. And I'm confident you know how high HIV infection is.
On second thought, induce monk mode is not so bad. Let me look up those rates. Whew. Moving right along.
For African American women. This ecology generates that type of behavior. This ecology creates the conditions for the higher rate of spread of HIV infection. This is from Jennifer Eberhardt and her colleague, Rebecca Hetty. Racial disparities in incarceration increase acceptance of punitive policies. So here what they showed is that the more these policies put high numbers of blacks in prison, the more likely whites were to support these tough on crime policies. If they felt it was less harmful to blacks, they decreased their support for the policy. From an evolutionary point of view, this is a clear-cut case of a cost-inflicting strategy. Tough on crime policies that put higher numbers of black men in jail, whites are supporting that, even liberal whites. When the tough on crime policies did not put more black men in jail, there was less support for those policies, whether they were right or on the left. This is cost infliction, and of course, this will fall most heavily on young black men. We are perceived as competition. This is what you do to your competitors, especially when you consider them the ultimate racial other.
Just let it breathe for a second. Just let it breathe for a second.
This is what you do to your competitors, especially when you consider them the ultimate racial other, the ultimate racial threat. You want these guys here. You want them harmed, you want them weakened, you want them dysfunctional, you want them addicted, you want them criminalized. This is how you contain the black male threat. And this is now. This is not 20 years ago, this is not the 1950s, this is right now. Now this clip details the role law enforcement plays in maintaining discriminatory ecologies and also the part they play in the cost-inflicting strategy for black boys that Raj Chetty detailed in his study.
Hey, listen up.
Now, this report was so damning, the city didn't want to say which city it was. So they said you can do the research, but you can't say what city you do it. All we know is it's a large American city. So here's the breakdown. They followed black and white officers who went into white neighborhoods and used force, same black and white officers who go into black neighborhoods and use force.
Noted.
So what they found, this is from like 1 million 911 calls, so a really big study. In the white neighborhoods, the black and white officers had similar levels for use of force.
Noted.
But when they went into the black neighborhoods, as you can see right there, we show white officers use force 60% more than black officers and use gun force twice as often.
Noted.
So obviously the black men, they don't see black men as any different from themselves. They're not afraid. They don't see them as, some strong, masculine, whatever.
Pump the brakes. First of all, I disagree wholeheartedly. In my opinion, as a black man, black cops and Latino cops, as is the case in South Florida, based on predominant demographic numbers, feel the need to overcompensate. The professor talks about this at least in one other video that I saw, but even in different work workplace environments, you have this need to sort of impress leadership. They're usually white folks by letting them know that, hey, you're on board and you're not a problem. In fact, you go even harder for the cause, even though there wasn't a specific request for you to show that kind of loyalty, if you will. So if the cause is about locking suckers up, you're gonna let it be known that blacks could get it too. It just so happens that blacks are the easiest targets in this system of white supremacy. And then there are instances where you have LGBTQ minority cops, who really, if you think about it, would probably be the easiest people to gaslight.
The white officers, they are feeling that way. They're feeling threatened, and more importantly, they're going into now a neighborhood that's a black neighborhood. So that feeling of threat for them, because of what they feel about black people, it's already there. But the stats, it's pretty clear. 60% more, they use force. So you can't say this is just an intersexual competition effect, because then you'd say, well, why aren't the black officers using force more against white people in the white neighborhoods? They weren't doing that.
I'm gonna run that back, slow down a little bit, because this section is very important.
But the stats, it's pretty clear. 60% more, they use force. So you can't say this is just an intersexual competition effect, because then you'd say, well, why aren't the black officers using force more against white people in the white neighborhoods? They weren't doing
this. This effect was found when the white officers went into the black neighborhoods. So how could we use this information? So right off the bat, you can say, if you want to reduce use of force and you want to reduce use of gun force, don't send in the white officers. Let the officers be representative of the communities they come from. You send in the black officers, you've reduced use of force by 60% and gun force twice as much. So, but of course that won't happen, because the other side of this is the reputational damage that would be associated with the white officers, saying, hey, the black officers don't go into the white neighborhoods and use all this force. Why are you going into the black neighborhoods and using all this force? It's going to make them look racist. They're not going to be willing to accept that kind of reputational damage. So this isn't going to be an option that you could choose. And because they dominate the institution, it's up to them to make that decision.
Letting it be known that my pending litigation, 3 black male police officers and 1 white male police officer and 3 black male police officers.
So they would never just say, hey, let's let the black officers go into the black neighborhoods and we can really reduce use of force.
Who's to say that's the case? Yo, in my opinion, post George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, there have been some innovative policing initiatives that have been taking place.
But that's what this information would suggest.
So what you're seeing there is that once I have the outgroup males that can threaten me effectively cordoned off, those ecologies become a choke point where I can focus my effort to destabilize those males even further.
Another method that Dave agreed to use against males in South Florida is to induce agoraphobia.
A higher percentage of these males will be poorly educated, underemployed, in long-term unemployment, and some even violently criminal.
Here's how they've been attempting to reverse engineer my life. Number 1, I'm not poorly educated. I would like to think so. I'm not smart. I just like to learn. Underemployment and long-term unemployment. They've been reverse engineering this by running all the tactics as it relates to street theater and the grassroots level on-the-ground harassment organized campaign. For myself, I was working in the legal field before the pandemic. Once the pandemic hit and after the pandemic, I sent out a sovereign signal and decided to spend my time and energy on my businesses while supplementing my income working as a rideshare driver. Check out the picture on your screen. As you can see, I excelled at that. Did it for a good minute. Then the groups responsible for the loser simulation got me out of that particular job. And really, that was another scenario where I could have filed suit. All right? So I start working for another company that has to do with driving vehicles that had a contract with the city of Miami. This company was called Freebie. And after a chance encounter with the city of Miami police chief, it's been nothing but examples of extreme targeting 101 while sprinkling in humiliation rituals. Applied to thousands of jobs, applied to FedEx, almost got my foot in the door, got hit with organized harassment. Started working at Amazon, and right before the 6-month mark where employee benefits were supposed to kick in, after excelling and breaking records, I ended up getting fired on my day off and my birthday. And to date, as of October 2025, every job I attempt to apply to and go on interviews appears to be some sort of strange simulation in which I am going to lose inevitably. Now, the interesting thing is that I used to have a bumper sticker on my vehicle that said, "It's a simulation." Now, I imagine whoever's been colluding to organize these things, they took offense to that, and now this is their way to one-up me and assert dominance. So I imagine that what they're doing now in terms of trying to restrict employment would help them put a check mark next to the long-term unemployment section. And as far as instances related to violence, I have 2 pending lawsuits that speaks to how they, quote unquote, tried to use this whole qualifier notion to firmly designate me into Class B, or whatever title it is that you want to give someone that's in the out group. But this is very troubling because I saw recently that they are now going to implement driverless police vehicles equipped with AI technology.
Due to how those ecologies limit legitimate status attainment in men, while at the same time raising their testosterone levels because these ecologies are more competitive.